Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here. As Phil said, I'm Matt Murray. I'm the Deputy Editor-in-Chief of the Wall Street Journal. I want to say it's an incredible pleasure and privilege for me to be here and for the Journal to be involved in a summit like this on a very important issue. So we're grateful to be here this morning. The sessions that we've had yesterday and today, I think, lead quite well into our conversation this morning. When we think about world-class universities and the public good, of course, as we've seen several times, as Secretary Reich made clear, that quickly leads into questions about money. Who pays? How do we afford it? What's the obligation that comes with that? What is the expected return? So we're here to talk about the concept of investment for the public good and who pays for that. We have a very distinguished panel, very diverse, and I want to introduce them to you quickly. You've already, of course, met Nick Dirks several times. He's spoken this morning. He is the 10th chancellor at the University of California, Berkeley. He's also a renowned historian and anthropologist who specialized in South Asia. He, prior to Berkeley, was the Executive Vice President for Arts and Sciences and the Dean of the Faculty at Columbia University. And earlier you were at University of Michigan, I know, so you've spent a lot of time in public education. So, Bernd Huber is the President of LMU Munich. You've been there quite some time. He is a professor of public finance. He's been the chair of public finance and Dean of the Faculty at the university. His research focus is on fiscal policy and management of government debt, sadly relevant subject areas for the conversation of our panel today. Jianhua Lin is the president of Peking University and a professor of chemistry. He previously has been president of Peking University and of Zhejiang University, so is very familiar with China's elite institutions of learning. We know that many Chinese institutions are really rising in the rankings, and that China's invested a great deal in public education. His research has covered a wide range of areas. He's published more than 140 journal articles, if that's right. And Debbie Sills is the National Managing Director for the Public Sector Practice at Deloitte Consulting. She focuses, I believe, on large-scale strategy and technology transformation for government agencies. She consults state governments. She's involved with higher education. She's held a number of roles over 15 years at Deloitte. And she's very involved in the topics we're going to talk about from a slightly different perspective. So it's great to be here. We're going to have a conversation, and then we will be taking questions from the audience in a little bit. So let me start with you, Nick. You've already spoken some today, and of course, Bob Reich has spoken to some of the funding challenges that are facing this institution and all public institutions here. Can you speak a little more in depth about your vision in 2016 as it's evolving of what the university's role in the public good should be, and what are the challenges, particularly the fiscal challenges, which I know you've been dealing with every day since you took office? What are the fiscal challenges in fulfilling that vision?
Well, I had an opportunity to talk a little last night also about some of these issues, and my colleague Bob Reich has laid out the broad case for not just the relationship between a world-class university and the public good, but specifically Berkeley and, of course, the University of California system, which has achieved, for very good reason, a kind of iconic status when it comes to public higher education in the U.S. Where else do you have a set of public universities that are so powerful in their research, that also are so broad in their access? That came out very clearly last year when another ranking, which I spoke about, in fact, in the speech that was snippeted from in the opening video when I was in Melbourne. That ranking came out and showed that of the top 10 colleges and universities on a scale having to do with accessibility, which had to do with percentage of Pell Grant eligible students, 6 of the top 10 were UCs, and Berkeley was there. And Berkeley was the only one in the top 10 that was not only there in the top 10, but in the top 10 in the THE rankings and many other rankings. So it's that combination that's been so extraordinary and so powerful. All of that being said, however, I don't think we are going to go back to where we were in terms of state funding. I had come here from Columbia 3.5 years ago thinking that maybe the tide had turned. I signed my contract the day after Proposition 30 passed, which looked to me like it was going to restore significant funding for state higher education. What it did is it secured the funding that previously existed, but of course there are many other pulls in the budget, not least in the K-12 education space. And despite the fact, as Bob said, the amount we spend as a state on prisons seems disproportionate to what we spend on universities. It's realistically speaking going to be a challenge to think about more than incremental kinds of assistance. Now, the state of California stopped paying any kind of capital, providing any capital assistance for buildings. We have many buildings on this campus that are old and that are seismically challenged in significant ways. We need the kind of bond capacity to get more debt, I think, for assets that are in fact owned by the state of California.
Seismically challenged, meaning specifically?
Well, we're right on the Hayward Fault, just in case you hadn't noticed. And if things start shaking here, it could be the rock and roll and it could be something else.
Yeah.
But but that being said, I think everyone who is working at the University of California in the senior administration acknowledges that it's going to have to be a mix of different kinds of funding, including tuition. Although, again, we have to be very clear. 40% of the students who come to Berkeley pay no tuition at all. We have a very rigorous need-based financial aid system that really does provide a net price that is as progressive as that of the top private universities, and we don't necessarily get that word out well enough. And that being said as well, the tuition for in-state students is still significantly lower than in private institutions. It's about $13,000 a year here for a California student. Columbia went over $50,000 for tuition the year I left. But that's, in a way, only the beginning. That's the traditional mix of student and taxpayer support for higher education. And the cost is going to go up, even as we have to address questions of cost. But we have to find other modes of support as well. And here in California, we're looking increasingly to the private sector, trying to make an argument that there's not only a public good, but there are goods that are publicly available to the private sector specifically that might be able to respond in ways that could be more helpful to the university than simply one-off philanthropic kinds of contributions on the basis of members of the corporate sector. But again, we have to look comprehensively across the whole spectrum of cost and the whole spectrum of what revenues can be, and acknowledge that it's going to be a mixed, a increasingly differentiated, and a necessarily, to some extent, ad hoc effort to provide the support we need for both the extraordinary research that goes on here and the great and inclusive education.
Professor Huber, I know LMU Munich essentially will take all students who want to go. You have an obligation and very open admissions. How are some of the, what strains that you see in California are you seeing similar versions of in Germany, or what's different in Germany? I mean, in other words, is the model in Germany facing some similar kinds of challenges as you look ahead, or are things healthy?
Well, contrasting our situation with the situation in California, several things come to mind. I think what you may call the German model, or even the European model, continental European model, it's somewhat different in the UK, is that we have a model of universities. Most of them are public universities. That's a similarity to the public university system in California. These public universities are typically financed by the taxpayer. In Germany, we do not have any tuition fees. Therefore, there is some of the problems Professor Reich has raised are not present in our system, and we have relatively free access to our universities. Therefore, our system performs relatively well in terms of accessibility and affordability, and we offer, I think, a relatively good education, and sometimes even an excellent higher education for millions of students in Europe. What are the problems behind this model? The problem is, of course, in terms of my country, Germany, we are currently benefiting from a strong economic expansion over the last 10 years. We have recovered from a severe economic crisis. Therefore, the government is able, both at the state level and at the federal level, to finance this level of higher education. And of course, the question is, what will happen in the future? Can we maintain this exclusive financing by the taxpayer? Several issues come to mind. In my view, I have a similar vision as Nick concerning what will happen in the future. We will probably have, let me say it stated in slightly different terms. If you consider the two main tasks of a university, research and education, the research side, as far as blue sky research is concerned, basic research, I think it's very clear that has to be financed by the government. That's a typical public good in the classic sense of welfare economics, and there is no private provision. I do not think that any private financing of these kind of activities is possible. On the side of the education aspect, there will be probably a mix in many countries between tuition fees and taxpayer financing, and it's very difficult to predict how this will develop in Germany. If you ask me for a prediction over the next 5, maybe 10 years, I would be quite confident that Germany will not introduce tuition fees, because we have introduced tuition fees about 10 or 15 years ago, and it turned to be to be very frank, a political disaster in many respects. They were abolished after a couple of years again, and politicians are very reluctant, in my view, now to repeat this experiment.
So I think it's safe to say, despite some of the strains, we'll talk more about this, but Robert Reich and Nick have talked about some American taxpayers rethinking or reevaluating or redefining that public good concept. That's not an issue for German taxpayers at this point. The idea
For the
of
time
public
being,
good
for the
is,
time being, yeah.
despite the populist tides and other threads in politics that I think Germany and other places are feeling.
Yeah. The real risk is that you move into a kind of underfinancing. And that happens in other European countries where you have just financing by taxpayers, but public funding is not sufficient to provide a really high quality level for education.
But Matt, if I may, just one of the things that came up at a breakfast we had yesterday is the relationship between the admission structure that you have, that is to say, anyone who's qualified can get in, and legitimacy the university has in the public. Because one of the issues in California has been the growing selectivity of the University of California. We now take only 17% of our applications, and people will remember back when there was no tuition. They'll also remember when, if they were in the top 12.5% of their class, they not only get into UC, they get into Berkeley. Now they get referred to UC Merced and don't see that as the same. So there is a question here about legitimation.
That's the strength, of the German system, that we admit many people, and that's clearly an advantage.
That's a good opening for you, Professor. China, we know, has been investing heavily in universities such as yours and building them up and creating world-class institutions. In a country the size of China, you obviously do have selectivity with tests, and so your university has basically the best of the very best. What's your perspective on the value of the university as a public good and the role in funding it, and I think in China's case also in balancing a hunger for higher education with questions about inequality of access to it?
Yeah, so I think first of all, China is, the situation of China is quite different from US, even Germany. So we are in the sort of transition period of time. So it's you could see the economy is growing, and also the government investment to the society, to the education and research are also growing. But this is one thing I think we should remember. The other is the traditionally China. I mean the people has the very traditional idea about they would like to invest more for their next generation, in particular the education. So that is you could trace back to 2,000 years ago. I mean, even the family may not reach, they are poor, but they want, invest the children's future. So that is the tradition. I think is keeping, all the way to nowadays. And so in that sense, China is quite, I think now it's quite complicated in terms of this investment or public good or private. So it's, first of all, I would say the government, both central government and local government, they are willing to invest more to the higher education. So I would, the previous lecture, give an idea about instead of public good, it's better to be a public investment. So this concept, I think, in China is quite popular now. The reason for that is I think we have very much shortage of high quality higher education in China. So that is so take for example, Shenzhen is a big city. The population is something like 20 million. And it's a new city. It's a very innovative city. And if you count on the international pattern of China, Shenzhen city is only half of the whole China. So there's a very innovative companies there. And but in terms of the higher education, is very poor. There's no good university there.
When you say China is in a transitional stage, and obviously part of that has been heavy investment for several decades to build up schools like yours, and rankings and your global reputations are vindicating that investment. Where does that lead? Does China need dozens more high-quality universities, a system closer to the United States, where we have, in some ways, one of the things the United States has going for it is a very strong kind of mid to upper mid-level tier? Does it need universities like yours ultimately to get to a place where they can be more open to more people from across the country? What are you transitioning to, do you think?
Yeah, so I think there's a common agreement that the higher education or university is very important for the local economy. So the local government always want to invite universities to their to set up campus or some new universities. So they think that is very important for the future. So for example, Shenzhen has now, they're inviting, many universities within China and out of China to set up the campus over there.
So that's good news. That's good news for everybody here.
That's right.
Entrepreneurialism in
That's
academia
right.
in China.
And also, when I was the president of Zhejiang University, there's a city, it's a small city actually, in China's standard, it's a 1 million population, is Haining. But there's no any university there. They invite us to have the international campus. So we have they build a campus, invest something like 3 billion Chinese yuan to build out the campus, and then at that time we invite the University of Illinois to have the engineering school, and University of Edinburgh to have a biomedical school. So it's really, I think there are a lot of opportunities there. So I wish that you could really find doing something there.
Debbie, I want to bring you in. You have a couple of perspectives that are interesting here. So one is you work with state governments all over the country. What's your take as you deal with them, and particularly the fiscal crisis and the recovery over the last decade? Do you think that the expectation of what a government, how involved the government should be in funding education, and what the government role in higher education is fundamentally changing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and thanks, Matt. I would say to some extent I see that as being true, but I think it's in response primarily to the pressures that state governments are feeling from, notwithstanding the prison situation, but with funding requirements for, particularly for healthcare, which is taking an enormous amount of their budgets these days, but also relative to the K-12 system, frankly, which is in many states been somewhat neglected and is not performing at the levels that it needs to perform to get the students to the level where they're going to into our higher education facilities. So I would say that, you know, clearly state funding is down, and I don't see that returning to where it was. I think as you know, as you said, Professor Dirks, that hoping that that's going to come back is probably, you know, not something that's going to be in the immediate future. So I think what states are dealing with right now is a significant increased cost relative to healthcare. As the population ages, it's going to become a larger and larger part of their discretionary budget. Add to that, you know, your K-12 spending, the things that they need to do around retooling existing workforces, which is significant. And I was listening into a panel of governors just recently, and they were talking about bank tellers and saying that, you know, bank tellers, there used to be thousands and thousands of bank tellers employed in the States, and that job has almost become extinct with the rise of technology. And retooling bank tellers into jobs like cybersecurity, for example, has become a very big focus where the government is getting involved in retooling existing workforces so that they can be, you know, productive members of the economies in those states. So I would say that what I see is an enormous amount of pressure on state governments for funding from all angles, and their ability to continue to, you know, to drive the sort of funding that in many cases they would like to drive into the higher education sector is severely constrained. And that will continue. So less about philosophy, I think, in most cases.
So they believe the
practicality.
mission still. They just can't afford it. That's your.
Yeah, and I think obviously, you know, it's hard to generalize across 50 states. I think all political, you know, governments have their own different types of focuses and motivations for doing what they do. But I would say, generally speaking, in terms of what I hear, it's much more about the available funding than about a philosophical belief that higher education should be funded in different ways.
Let me ask you also, and then we can take it back. And Nick alluded to new models, which we should talk about. You're a large employer at Deloitte, and in some ways, you're a prototypical knowledge worker kind of company. You want to hire college graduates, and you're looking for a certain kind of skill set. We've talked about companies and their role in funding more college. Or more college costs and involved. How do you see the role of a company like yours, or the potential role of a company like yours, in this landscape as it changes?
Yeah, again, another interesting question. I would say that, first of all, there is an increasing awareness in corporations and firms like ours of our role in public good. And so, you know, clearly our focus is on bottom line performance, on driving economic growth, on employing the right types of qualified individuals to continue to fuel the growth of our industry. But I think there is an increasing focus on the public good. Most organizations, as they look at their corporate responsibility strategies and how they're going to use their power as large employers to do public good, are focusing in on particular areas. You know, if you go on a United Airlines plane recently, you'll hear about their focus on feeding Americans who can't afford, you know, food and food security. So at Deloitte, our focus is around education, and we have set up a foundation that we use to provide lots of funding through the education process.
You do certain things. You do curriculum and you do individual students more than, for instance, large grants to universities.
That's correct. And I think, this is an interesting topic for where it goes in the future as state funding goes down. But obviously in the boardroom, in large corporations, they're looking at short-term return on investment for the most part. Taking that long view is something that's relatively new to businesses in our market. And so I think that we balance that whole idea of how do we help to foster the sort of students and education system that we want as a member of the community, where at the same time, being able to step away from it a little bit and think about some of the things that I heard about last night and this morning, where education really is more than preparing individuals for the workforce. And so we fund primarily, we fund a lot of individual students. For example, consultants who work in our firm who want to, go back for master's programs and so forth. We fund that type of activity. We work through a lot of different not-for-profit agencies and foundations to fund particular students who are either have diverse backgrounds or particular areas of interest. For example, in the STEM area is very much of interest to us. So we provide funding for students. We help with growth of curriculum and professors in certain universities to help them to grow their curriculums. And that's much more where our philanthropic dollar goes at this point in time. How that plays out in the future, I think, is going to depend on a number of variables.
And Nick, how do you think about it? I mean, as company funding becomes more important, and obviously this is a robust topic of debate, you don't need me to say that. How do you differentiate between the common good and the corporate good? I mean, that's a tricky thing to navigate, and it becomes very controversial in some cases, of course, with particular donations and grants and so on.
Yeah, and it becomes especially, I think, controversial at a place like Berkeley that has been very concerned about the relationship between who funds and what is done, whether in research or education. A very strong commitment to academic freedom, as indeed there should be. A place that has an identity that's wrapped up in the free speech movement and freedom of expression and so on. That being said, Berkeley is in fact also at the center of a great many innovative new kinds of relationships and entrepreneurial activities that suggest the faculty are sort of adapting to a very different kind of environment. I gave some statistics last night about numbers of startups and various kinds of funding that has come in to help support efforts to move ideas that students and faculty have had into the marketplace. And of course there are recent examples, and they were, again, hugely controversial, of support for research and development that came in from a corporate entity, like most famously at Berkeley anyway, the BP support for work in the energy biosciences. But again, it was negotiated, it was worked through, it became a clear, successful experiment that foundered a little bit more because of the cost of petrol than because of the actual arrangements that were being done and the work that was getting support around synthetic fuels and biofuels and the like. So I think that we are seeing a real change, even if the language of valuation and assessment around the corporatization of the university would suggest a much starker kind of debate. And we're seeing it because there is real support for things that a faculty wants to do anyway, and that, of course, is the sine qua non.
For you as chancellor, what's the toughest part of this change? I mean, you're obviously facilitating it. The money is useful. The model's changing. What's the hardest part of it to manage for you? Is it getting these lines right? You must get donors sometimes who do want to who do have
Sure.
some perhaps a mix of motives. They want to help, and maybe they have an agenda too. you're negotiating and navigating these rules. Is that the hardest part? Are there other particular challenges as the model takes shape?
Well, look, there are always donors who will have very specific agendas that come from a passion about a particular activity, outcome, project, or what have you. What I find, and I found this at Columbia as well as at Berkeley, is that if you really engage them in learning about how the university functions, how the university has to set up certain kinds of firewalls, and the extent to which the work that is being done, and this can be seen even at the level of the relationship between basic research, curiosity-driven research on the one side, and applied research on the other, that there are all sorts of sometimes unintended but extraordinary outcomes of investments of that kind. Donors become more relaxed, and then they see extraordinary things happening, and they become converts in a way to understanding the way in which a university operates. Universities are different, and the idea that venture philanthropy is easy, and that's the term that is sometimes now being used, is wrong. It's not. But it carries on in a way a debate that's gone on for years, more in private institutions than public, about how to secure academic freedom, the autonomy of faculty research, and getting the support you need. And even when you are getting support from a federal agency, you're dealing with agendas and you're dealing with priorities that are set outside of the university.
Federal mandates and so on. Professor, in Germany, there's a tradition of companies, particularly on the research front, as donors. You deal with that. You do fundraising. Are the lines pretty clear there? Are they pretty established? Do you face some of these same tensions at times?
Well, of course, Germany has a very strong industrial base in automotive industries, chemical industry, industrial equipment, and there are a lot of research contracts. This concerns less my university, but the so-called technical universities and their engineering departments. And we have also similar projects. And as Nick said, it's difficult. You walk a fine line. You have to make sure, you have to ensure academic freedom. You must make sure that results of this research can be published, that they also serve an academic purpose. But I think we have now an established modus operandi, so to say, that in most cases that is successful. And I do not think that this kind of more or less applied research, also this is a difficult distinction between basic and applied research, and sometimes one can say that sometimes research which is not yet applied as basic research. But I don't think that the main problem of financing concerns this type of research. But you also have research with very little prospect of receiving immediate results. Let's say research in astrophysics, research on medieval German literature, and whatever. Yeah, you have to finance these research projects as well, and that's a real challenge for the future. And if we are able to find private donors, not necessarily corporations, well, that would be a large success. But I think we will have to rely on
like patrons, almost like medieval patron who supports, particularly in the humanities.
Sometimes you find this kind of persons, but that's good luck.
Yeah, the medieval German literature devotee. Professor, again, China's in a different position. You're building up your universities, and China wants to train scientists, wants to train engineers and chemists, and state-owned enterprises are very involved. How does the corporate role fit in, and can Westerners be too dreamy about this? I mean, ultimately, people want education, they want jobs. How do the corporations interact with your university and your graduates?
Yeah, so I think they're, just like I said, that there are two driving force. One is the business field, and the other is the local government. So in China, so they both like to have more the applied research of from the universities. So we are quite invited by the local government and these private sectors. So they are, take for example, we are now. I mean, as a university, I would think that you have to focus on your core mission That is education and also the fundamental research. So otherwise, you're not to be the world-class university. So then, but you have to, on the other hand, you have to provide your service to the society. The basic idea of the Peking University is that we keep our faculties, and also the schools focus on the central mission, but we are set up a sort of applied research institutions together with the local government, provide the service.
And do companies at all contribute to those at all, or is it purely government? It's purely government.
Yeah, the government and companies, so they are working together, the local one. So for example, we have our chemistry department has the research institute at Jiangsu province. It's quite far away, but the hiring people there, but we are in charge of all the operation, but we're hiring the people, researchers there, and the local government and the private sector provide some funding to run this institute.
Can China make room? Does China have room and support for, let's say, the student who wants to study medieval Chinese literature?
Sure.
Without it necessarily applied. Is that possible, or is that something that?
The Berkeley has the institute in Shenzhen, and so also you know that NYU has a new campus at Shanghai, so and also the Duke Kunshan or somewhere. So it's quite welcome to all these universities come to China. There's a lot of space, I think, a lot of things you can do there. So,
Debbie, you're a consultant, so you're here at the panel of college leaders. Obviously, your experience is rooted in the American one, but when we talk about a different model for the university to be able to remain a public good, but to deal with different straitened circumstances, how should the model change from your view in terms of what it offers, perhaps when you look at the costs or certain emphases of universities, particularly, I mean, we've got 3 universities here, and of course many others, that are seeking to be world-class, which implies a level of investment and growth and ambition that does require a great deal of resource. So from your consultant's hat, how do you think universities should be thinking? And you advise some of them, I know. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's, as we look into the future, I think there are a couple of things that have really been driving not just universities, but I think public policy and how governments spend money and how public entities spend money generally. And I think the first of those is a focus on outcomes. And I do think that the outcome and the value model has changed fairly substantially and will continue to change, partly because of the disruptive technology environment that we live in and the pace of change that we're all dealing with today. And so, what's a good outcome? Is a good outcome a good job with a good salary? Is a good outcome for a student maybe much more in the academic freedom spectrum as a creative and fast-paced thinker that is going to contribute to our economic growth as a society in the future? It could be numerous things. But one of the things that I think is true of many universities today is that they haven't yet come to terms with the transparency of the data in looking at what are those paths for outcomes and what are the costs associated with those outcomes, whether it be at a student in a student-centric environment or as a longer-term outcome that we're looking for. So I do think that there's going to be a move to the model that is much more outside in than inside out in terms of looking at it through the student lens and what does that outcome look like, and then how do you harness the capability, the data that exists in a university system to really understand how the costs and the funding requirements should be allocated to drive to that outcome. That, I think, is going to change potentially a lot of organization, a lot of behavior, a lot of the cost-based decisions that universities make. as they think about the future. For example, the outcomes associated with perhaps the German literature area are going to be very different than the outcomes associated with the engineering track, perhaps. So how do you look at those outcomes and then weigh in your university how they would be funded, who would fund them, how much funding they should get, depending upon and how what the term of that measurement of the outcome is going to look like. So I think that's going to be a big change for universities in terms of the way they're operating. We're seeing it happen. It's very analogous to what's happening in the healthcare system today. Moving from that fee-for-service environment into an outcome-based model is very analogous to what I suspect the higher education sector is going to deal with over the next little while. And then I'd say the other thing is that the pace of change is accelerated so quickly. And so now I put sort of my pragmatic business hat on and say, with a business lens, that necessity for businesses to partner more effectively with academic institutions, I think, is on the rise. Because just keeping ahead of the change from a corporate environment is very, very difficult, and I think there's an opportunity here.
Are you talking, just to clarify, are you talking about businesses with universities sort of in the formative years, the typical college years, or are you talking about a different model in which businesses and universities interact throughout somebody's lifespan and career, and a sort of a university training becomes more a part of everybody's life and career as they grow?
I think both, but I'm really focusing on that in terms of what models there might be for funding or for supporting ventures within a university as a mashup, a collaboration between public, private, not-for-profit to both grow the future talent that's going to be necessary to deal with the pace of change or to get ahead of that pace of change. I think one of the things that we struggle with as an organization, and I think universities will struggle with as well, is the ability to change your business model fast enough to keep up with everything that's happening in the market and in the exponential growth of technology. And getting that pace of change, that thinking and way of working in that dynamic environment at the student level, I think benefits our economy and our businesses longer term.
Professor Huber, you had some thoughts there, I could see.
It is true, we have this debate about outcomes of research projects, especially politicians demand that universities make clear what is the result of certain research activities. And to some extent this is clearly legitimate as the public, the taxpayer wants to know what happens with my money if it's spent at the university. On the other hand, it should be clear that the success of the university system is that it's based on intellectual curiosities. Therefore, it's curiosity-driven. People want to find out certain things. If you're a researcher, you have not the application in mind. What you have in mind is first you want to solve an intellectual and technical and academic problem or a question to answer a question. And that should be maintained at universities. It should not be. We should not think from the outcome, but it should be made sure that researchers still have the freedom and the autonomy to follow this academic curiosity and to stimulate academic debates. That's very important. If you just implement an output-oriented system, I think that would destroy some of the key advantages of the university system.
I mean, Nick, that's really the crux of the challenge, isn't it? Yeah. And I think, I listened to that debate. We lived that debate, and I can kind of see both sides. You kind of want. There are many people and many taxpayers and many citizens who feel we're paying a lot for the institutions. We need jobs. We need people to fill them. From the individual perspective, of course, you also want the freedom to explore your intellectual curiosity and have it take you places and pursue perhaps your own research or unique paths. How do you, that's the tension, isn't it?
It's absolutely the tension, and it's one that I think all of us wrestle with all the time, because none of us want the university to become solely directed towards skill creation and product development. Although we train for skills and we create knowledge that makes products of all kinds available. But at the end of the day, the question of our summit, how to make that argument, how to make it to the public in a way that will be persuasive. I mean, this is increasingly difficult. And the idea that, what I talked about last night, the kind of hub of intellectual activity as well as of research and training being a justification for the university is making less and less sense to people who feel the universities are elitist or they're exclusive, they're not for them. Recent statistic I saw based in the US is that in 2012, if you look at the lower quartile of the socioeconomic spectrum, 14% of that group graduated from college, whereas the top quartile, 60% graduated from college. And there are lots of other kinds of demonstrations of this that make clear that despite the extraordinary work that Pell Grants have done and that universities have engaged in opening up the diversity of their student bodies, there's still a very, very segmented relationship to the university. And in those cases, the arguments around intellectual curiosity are clearly playing a lot better in one side of the spectrum than the other. And of course, it's producing in turn, I think, a great deal of even greater suspicion about why it is taxpayers should pay for this. What is it in aid of? How does it benefit me?
Yeah. Can you, do you, if you think about Germany and China, and you have some familiarity with the models in both, are there things to learn from the message that they're putting out there? I mean, when your heart must skip a beat when you hear Professor Huber say, we tried to charge tuition and there was a revolt against it and the taxpayers did it.
Oh, by the way, we tried that here too, and it had a little bit of a reaction. Look, we said this yesterday, you don't get any votes for raising tuition, which is why the current governor of California has had the political interest in a 6-year tuition freeze at the University of California, which is one of our financial problems. But there's no support for that. And of course, the other question is access. So we're thinking a lot at Berkeley right now about how to think about future enrollment. Should we think of growing? There's not very much in the way of an appetite either in Sacramento or I think on the campuses of the University of California to set up new campuses, the old model of keeping one campus after the next rolling out. We've had a lot of trouble getting the funding for the new campus in the Central Valley, UC Merced. But on the other hand, are there things we can do to even increase the capacity of Berkeley right now? We think our students should have study abroad opportunities. We think our students should have more in the way of internships. We would love to find ways to partner with the private sector in terms of giving credit for real internship work that also has real financial support that again will maximize readiness to enter into the marketplace, expose students to things that they can't necessarily get in the classroom, relieve some of the classrooms on campus so that we can have more students coming through, and the same would apply for study abroad. But do we need to do more than that? Do we need to really think about using everything from online technology to different ways of providing a kind of pathway for students through college to markedly increase our capacity? And that's when I look at Germany and China, and I think there are things perhaps we can learn from this, because I do believe that as our selectivity goes down, our public support is going to go down as well.
Debbie, I set you up a little bit with a question about the model, so I want to come back and have you make one point I know that you made to me about employers. To be clear, that part of the output based discussion from your perspective is, and part of what you like in the college system is giving people broadly the ability to think, which can come from lots of different kinds of majors, right? Can you just explain that a little bit? That there's, when you say an output based, you're not looking from a utilitarian perspective.
Yeah, that's right, Matt. And so, I think about, and I'll get very parochial for a minute and talk about, what sort of opportunities we provide for graduates of high-class universities such as Berkeley. We hire people from all, actually, disciplines. The whether it be literature or engineering or pre-med or, the discipline is not as important to us in terms of the people we hire, which might seem interesting. We're a business, you would expect us to be primarily focused on business undergrads, and that's not the case at all. Because what we're looking for are creative, analytic, innovative, articulate students who have an ability to learn, an ability to think, an ability to quickly assimilate sometimes ambiguous and diverse types of information, to work in teams effectively, to come up with creative and new ideas for their clients and for their clients' businesses. And so a good outcome for us is a well-rounded student with that ability to research and learn and engage quickly and effectively in solving problems. And so when I talk about outcomes, that's a very parochial and even short-term outcome for us. I mean, we hire lots of students. We need that today, and we hire that today. But from a longer-term outcome perspective, I really mean not just those outcomes that are related to our short-term business generally, but what are the outcomes that universities and colleges can articulate to their funders, whether it be to their government funders or to their private funders, around what outcomes are they really trying to achieve and where are they putting their focus. They could be societal outcomes, innovation outcomes, long-term outcomes, shorter-term outcomes. They don't need to be directly related with a business benefit in an ROI, in the type of ROI calculation that you would see in the boardroom of many of the corporations around the country. But I do think it's important that those outcomes are able to be articulated to funders who may be wanting to, provide input to that funding.
Yeah, at Berkeley, we think about this in at least two different ways. One of which is, again, to do what you said, not tell students they have to major in this in order to do that, but rather that when they major in whatever they major, they should first of all choose what their passion is.
Yes.
But secondly, take advantage of a range of different courses, and some of them are new ones that we're creating that will, for example, introduce all of our students in the course of time, the next few years, we hope, to some kind of digital literacy, to some kind of data analytic competency. But again, they could do that in the field of public health. They could do it even in the field of medieval German literature if you do digital humanities. But it does give you a kind of sense of familiarity with the world that you're going to be entering. Second way, of course, we're thinking about it.
Medieval German literature is not the only humanities we have at our university.
We're picking on you, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
Also medieval German literature
Yeah.
is wonderful, we just want to say for the record.
But by the same token, we're thinking more and more, and I know all of you are as well, about lifelong learning, how to be able to come back to the university to take advantage of things that will help you shift as indeed the world of work itself shifts. So trying to prepare students to be leaders in terms of thinking outside the box as to what, not just their own employment, but what the shape of the economy in their area will be, and then to be able to come back and get more skills as they go along.
Can you add, Professor Lin, how you think about it? I mean, again, we're in an age when technology and the changing nature of our world makes lifelong learning really imperative for all of us. How do you think about preparing your students for that and where they might go? You're at a moment still where you've built up so much in China very quickly that your students are really, still early in their careers in many cases. How do you think about training them and keeping them adapting going forward?
I think we are moving from the very specialized education to more broad education. So that is a major trend of China. So it's the basic concept is we are trying to combine those general education with the specialized education. More, China is used to be more discipline orientated. It's sort of adapting from a formal Soviet Union system. So I think in the past 10 or 15 years, the Chinese universities are moving quickly. To try to provide more broad to stimulating student sort of ideas, creative ideas, those kind of things. It's a similar concept. But I would say that we are. I emphasize that in China we are in the transition period of time. So everything. I think the good part is there's more tolerance. So you can try. Whenever you have ideas, you can try. You can make a test. If I make the experiment. On the other hand, so it's sort of there's we are in the very complex situation. So there's many regulations from the government, and the investment channel is not such a. I mean, it's quite complicated. It's a increase, but it's quite complicated. So you have to be as a leader. You have to be sort of. Far-sighted thinking, and to make your university moving.
We're going to go to questions in a minute, but I just want to quickly, before we do that, and I'll start with you again, Professor. Just to be clear in the context, to come back to where we started, you don't feel in China a particular questioning of the idea of the university as a public good, or a particular need to articulate that argument? Do you think it's widely accepted in China right now, this university growth?
Yeah, at this moment, we don't.
Do you listen to
it's
the debate
different.
here?
I mean, I think in China, so the high quality higher education is sort of is sorted. It's not oversupplied. Like I don't know if it's the right description or not, but it's sort of sorted. So the public and also the local government, they want to invest more. Even the community want to invest more to have good education.
And you feel similarly in Germany today, right? That this debate is not really on the table in the same way that it is in this country.
Moving from public to private.
Well, just sort of just reinforcing for taxpayers and the public the value, the common good of the university. That's.
I think in Germany there's currently that might be a difference to the United States and to other countries. There is a hope. Maybe that will not turn out to be true, that investing in higher education, investing in university, investing in research will help Germany to establish its role as one of the leading leading economic nations in the future. And therefore, they are strongly inclined to invest in these institutions. That's the current situation. And there were ideas to establish a kind of private university system in Germany, but it's largely a relatively small segment of what I would call business schools, where we have some private suppliers. But otherwise, it's
specialty kind of a.
Yeah, and the role of universities as suppliers of the common good, that is, I think that's accepted in Germany to a large extent.
But you hear, Nick, you think it's changing some. Again, we've got in China and Germany, we have ambitious countries rising here. The United States has long had now a pretty established university system. Have we gotten spoiled by it, do you think?
Look, I mean, I think the U.S. is, how about this for truism of the morning? The U.S. is different than China and Germany. And if we had somebody from,
you're an anthropologist.
from the UK up here, I think actually we'd also hear a very different kind of story that sounds more like the U.S. at this point. I'm looking at my colleague from Cambridge. But the truth is there has been, I think, for some years, a concern about public institutions in general. Yeah. And that's one of the major fault lines in the debate that takes place politically, and it takes place in states as well as at the federal level. So, California was, in that respect, even though you had the Morrill Act, you had land-grant universities, you had great public universities set up across the Midwest, California really was different. And honestly, when I thought about moving here from New York 4 years ago, it was because this was the best system of public, but just higher education, anywhere that I'd ever known. And what has struck me over the last 3.5 years is how contested this idea is, how much there is a kind of debate almost at every level about whether taxpayers should support this. And if they do, what would be the compact? How would that compact be changed? How would we be regulated by the state? Now, this is a very old story. And UC was set up in 1868. And in the 1870s, it almost closed down because there was so much dissension across the state and an effort to take direct control from Sacramento. That was changed when a new constitutional was written and UC got autonomy, but it's not new. I do think that the period between, well, certainly after World War II, but even before, of support for this university has to do with the fact that California didn't have the private institutions that the East Coast had. But we're now at a moment when this is contested. I wanted to actually ask about one other thing, if I may, because it came up in, I know we're going to open things up, but we haven't talked about student debt. And Secretary Reich mentioned that, and just about everybody who thinks about higher education in the US uses the levels of student debt to show that there is real concern, that we're just driving up costs because we can, and that we are doing everything from charging unbelievable rates to students, not giving them the opportunity to get the skills they need to pay us back, or certainly not thinking enough about how you would construct a pay-it-back system that would be income-based and, in that sense, more like the Australian or British model. But then, of course, which also conflates all the different institutions in the US. And as we know, a lot of the debt, a lot of the student debt that's built up in the US has been built up from for-profit universities. And it's a very, very different picture if you drill down and look at it. Even this morning in the Chronicle of Higher Education is a review of 2 recent books on student debt that say it's not the kind of problem that people think when it comes to four-year colleges at the more selective level. One of the books is called Game of Loans, which is an evocative title, to say the least. But I raise this because, again, this has become one of the rallying cries of a critique of higher education. I would love to see the Clinton administration come in and make college free for students coming from families making less than $125,000. This is a different part of the same, I think, question. But I don't think it's going to happen. And I think...
because of money or because of the political messaging, or both?
Well, I think it's because of money, because of the political messaging, and also because there would be, if such a thing came into being, a real concerted effort to control costs of some of the great research institutions that are public in ways that might end up compromising their own capacity to compete at the highest level with private institutions. So I think it's an enormously complicated.
And let me put one thing into perspective. I've been university president for about 15 years. It's the first time that I've been asked what the United States may learn from the German university system. And I must really, I think one must really emphasize in many, many respects, I think the US higher education system is a role model for higher education systems all over the world. The performance of US universities is really impressive, and in many cases, in many respects, I think US is a role model for our universities in Germany, and not the other way around.
Well, because I mean, you've got both sides, right? Because
of
the
course,
theory being that the sort of the competitive, more market-driven approach here raises everybody's game a little bit. Right? So we could keep talking, I think, but I think we want to take some questions out there. So are there colleagues with microphones and questions? Anyone? I can't really tell if there's hands or not out there.
Confusion is complete. Therefore, there are no questions.
I got one.
If you could just tell us your name and affiliation.
Good afternoon. I'm Professor Dubey from Delhi University, India. I've been just listening to all of you regarding the world-class universities and the public good, and vis-a-vis your own countries, what will you do for helping for the public good at global level? I just want to know that. Thank you.
What?
The public good at the global level, what is the obligation of what's the obligation of the university for public good globally? Is that fair?
Well, as an economist, I think there is a problem at the international level of public goods. If you consider the results and outcomes of basic research as public goods, and it's typically an international public good. You derive research results, so let's say in the United States, in Germany, in China, and this benefits countries all over the world because it's available for everybody. Therefore, the consequence out of this is if you have an international public good, you need more international cooperation. We have done this, for example, to a very small extent in Europe with establishing European research policies like the European Research Council. And one might think about there are now global networks of international university organizations like the FI statement, which we had a couple of years ago. And that's probably one thing where we can intensify cooperation in many respects.
Professor.
So I think the very good point that if you look at the whole global situation, so the different countries, the university are in different stage, and also the higher education policy is different. So I think now I emphasize that China is now in the transition period of time. We are not facing the problem you have, but you certainly, like Germany and the US, your university system is very good. So we are just trying to catch up. So I think for the public good in the global sense should be a win-win situation. So you have to understand what is the need from the country like China and what is the developed country like Germany and US. Then you could find some common interest, then we could invest together. Actually, in the past 10 or 15 years, we cooperate with the Munich and Berkeley very closely. I think that's a very good model. We send our faculties over to your university to cooperate, and our student. So your students also come to China to learn the situation of the East Asian areas. I think that has to be in sort of win-win there.
And Nick, I suppose, just to add to that, I suppose there's also, again, part of the job of an administrator is you have to balance the tensions a bit, right? You want to serve the international community, but you want the local community to feel you're rooted and invested in that community, that your eyes aren't on the stars, partly for the reasons that you talked about.
No, and I think that's especially true in a public state university where you do have a kind of rootedness and a local obligation. But on the other hand, first thing to say is universities are interconnected. We, like many of you, are engaged in more and more international partnerships. We understand that these relationships are important for our students, important for our faculty, but also important for the public more broadly, because we're taking on global issues and global problems that have to be solved in global collaboration. But to that extent, it's nothing new. We've been connected for a very long time. If you look at the history of universities, it has been a global system. And just to refer to the situation in India, I must say that the U.S. educational system, and indeed the U.S. economy, especially perhaps in the Silicon Valley, is uniquely has been uniquely reliant on educational institutions in India. So many IIT graduates have played a absolutely transformational role in the IT world in the U.S. that for a long time India was educating some of our top people. But that is a way of saying that I think these connections and exchanges and relationships are really critical going forward, even for the most locally rooted and connected of universities.
Other questions out here? No.
My question was that, how you are going to transform the education in the developing countries through your, world-class universities with the global international cooperations. Because in Silicon Valley, most of the people, they come here, they study here, and then they get the jobs. How about if you go there and take some good people from there or teach them well, and we have a collaboration, long collaboration for a win-win situation, as Chinese professor is telling.
Do you want to add anything to that? I mean, that's sort of that's part of where China is on the scale, right? China is bringing Chinese academics back and staffing universities. I suppose part of it takes quite a bit of investment over time, right?
So that is that is also, I think it's very complicated. We are trying to recruit, of course, the talent from US, from Silicon Valley, and so we are doing quite well. But still, I mean, I should say that we are in this different stage, and so there's a lot of complicated, the inner tension is created by those kind of things. It's really need time to relax those, to make the system sustainable. So I think it takes time. So, but the direction is right. We should. I think we should send students abroad, more talent students abroad, and learn more and get their experience, and then we try to recruit them back. So that's
and that certainly, I think, that's part of that. That's certainly part of the intentions of American universities with foreign students, right? And some of the programs that are set up for some nationalities sort of have that in mind. Come, learn the system, bring it home, and help develop it. So.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Other questions? That's one up there.
Jukka Kola, University of Helsinki. Thank you. This is a specific Germany question for Bernd. So how do you see the future impact of this government special measure of excellence initiative that is actually very much focusing on certain universities and providing quite sufficient funding for those? So how do the other universities see it, and what is the future impact of it in general when comparing some other countries and the development of their higher education sectors? Thank you.
Well, Jukka, that's a question I can answer in two parts. First, as president of my own university, my job is now to win this competition and to ensure that we get enough funding as our university, and that's my first priority. And my second priority is then, of course, reflecting what happens to those universities who are not successful. And actually, I must say we have that's clearly a problem has been a problem of the Excellence Initiative in Germany, that it has separated somewhat the different universities. To say, for those who have never heard about this rather peculiar instrument, it has a program which supports so-called excellent universities in Germany, and the federal government has provided special funding for this. That's in very briefly would be my answer.
Okay.
Good morning. I'm Rich Mabukela from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. If you look at the most recent publication of the rankings, maybe if you look at maybe the top 200 world-class institutions, virtually overwhelming majority would be in the US, the UK, and maybe some other European countries, and a handful of others here and there. I think maybe the only 2 African universities that are in that top 200, both of them in South Africa. And so I'm maybe just revisiting the question that was posed earlier regarding world-class universities, particularly in developing countries. The model, or at least the response that was offered, seems to suggest that we bring talent to the US, to the UK, to the top universities here, and then we hope to recruit that talent back. But the question that I would like to ask is, I'd like to just hear a little bit of your thoughts regarding how we develop world-class talent in these developing countries. Are there ways in which we pay, we think about, or we collaborate, we engage with the universities in the countries where they exist, rather than sort of having this flow that might or might not necessarily go back after it comes to the US or the UK or other parts of the world.
Right, and also the concern, I think part of the question was people come here and stay here rather than, yeah.
Right, so I guess, what is it that needs to be done to create world-class universities in developing countries? And what might be the models that one might pursue to ensure that that occurs there?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And of course, whether you're at the University of Illinois or the University of California, you're struggling to maintain world-class universities right, right here. But your point is absolutely spot on, because if you take what the real needs of Africa are, they're going to be so tied to the capacity of Africa to build world-class universities for themselves. And typically, that requires global collaboration of different kinds and investments that will be huge. And I think, although we can't invest money from our state institutions directly, we can provide all kinds of assistance, all kinds of collaborative relationships that could be helpful. One of the nice programs that exists in the U.S., and I can't remember if Illinois is part of it, is something funded by the MasterCard Foundation, which is providing scholarships for students from sub-Saharan Africa to come both for undergraduate and graduate study. In the US, there is a requirement to go back for a certain period of time, but there's a built-in expectation that there will be continuing relationships that exist both between and among the networks that are established by the individuals, but also between the institutions. And I believe that we do need to, one of the problems with having a debate about the future of higher education and the public good in the US is it tends to make us more insular. And of course, the history of many of our global collaborations has been to go to places with a lot of resources, and things get left out in that I think are going to be critical for the global public good going forward.
Is there a role for multinationals that they are not playing, or for large companies? I don't know if you want to speak to this, Debbie. I mean, large companies are often the ones that have the money, have the resource, can be the connector. Should they be doing more to help seed and develop institutions in emerging countries like this?
Yeah, likely, Matt. It's not a topic I've spent a lot of time thinking about, to be honest with you, but I do think that there are some interesting ways to catalyze education in emerging countries based on technology these days. And I do think we're underusing the tools and technologies that are available to us today to kickstart, in some cases, that academic freedom and access to education through technology means in areas where perhaps there isn't the funding, the wherewithal to create universities that would serve the need in the short term. So I do think there might be some other ways to think about this as well.
I think I sense maybe another panel topic for you guys. So we're just about out. Do you think we could take, if there's one more, maybe we could take one more quick one if anybody has a question? If not, I know it's hot in here and people are probably ready for a break. So I guess that's it. Thank you very much to the panel for a really great discussion.
Thank you, Matt.
Great.
Thanks.